wanted to explore, what does creativity mean to all of us here. Today we have quite a diverse pool. We have a drama educator, Adi, who is, a drama educator, a playwright. He's been an actor since 2006, based on my LinkedIn stalking of your profile, Adi.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. I hope I got that right. That's good.
Yeah, yeah,
We also have Jade. Jade is a creative director, and has had over 20 years in advertising, from the likes of Ogilvy,
Heard this so
Debs.
many times as well.
Yeah, yeah, in so many different settings. Oh my God, I bet you're sick of hearing it from me. Yeah, but so obviously, in Jit's role, creativity is such a big part of what he does on a day-to-day basis. So it'd be interesting to hear his views as well. And we also have Adil, uh, who is an expert in critical logistics. He's been doing it for a few decades now. He's the COO of a very successful SME in the critical logistics space. And I guess one thing about critical logistics, as we will probably hear very soon after, what is unique about it is that every day, it changes. The demands of your clients changes. The situation changes. So that is something that I think is very unique to hear. How does creativity apply, or does it even apply to logistics in that sense? And of course, we have Dr. Wena Du, who's a data scientist. She's had over a decade, in firms like Rakuten, A-Star, OCBC. So again, as someone who's a data scientist, how does creativity apply to her field? So maybe I'll just get the ball rolling. We'll do a quick introduction. Everybody can chip in, and then let's see how it goes. Maybe we'll start off with Adi here. We'll probably go in alphabetical order.
Okay, Ken.
Yeah.
So what we just introduced ourselves at this moment.
Yeah, tell us
Yes.
more about yourself, what you do, and what do you think about creativity and how it applies to what you do, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Adi, and you've already done a wonderful introduction about myself, actor, director. But I always tell everyone, like, at the heart of it all, I am actually an educator, and I am more interested in teaching drama in classes. And usually in drama classes, there's this like strong emphasis on the concept of creativity and like thinking of ways to do things differently, and also to kind of like find possible solutions that have not really been thought of. The issues that I have usually with creativity is that a lot of times teachers or like policymakers, they feel like, oh, we need to encourage creativity in our students, but at the same time they have this fear that if the students were to think creatively, they might be disruptive, and that is something that I feel like a lot of like parents are worried about, because like when you want to be creative, at times you need to really step out of the lines and like really explore what is out there. And like being in an Asian country, conservative country like Singapore, sometimes the idea of creativity is being frowned upon, because like you have to sometimes go against tradition, you have to go against things that you have done for the past few years the same way, and thus making it part of tradition and culture, and then you have to explore what else can be done. And sometimes during your exploration you will come across things that you thought would be more interesting than what have already been practiced so far. And some people, they feel like, oh, we shouldn't explore that side, that new things, we should just stick to like the what we have been having for the past few years. We should stay with what is safe. So being creative, I feel, is also about taking risk, and like not just about being safe. So there's a lot of this grappling of like we want our students to be creative, but at the same time we don't want to let them take the risk. Yeah,
Oh,
so
that's
that's
very
something that I'm
interesting.
I'm always
Yeah.
challenged with. Yeah.
Do you see that in like, for example, was there any situation that comes to mind where this played out? Like, it could be, I don't know, a new way that you tried to introduce, or maybe even, I'm not sure if you teach syllabus, for instance, but what are some instances where, that was apparent to you?
Okay, there is this one time I was trying to do this exercise which we call the magic stone exercise. So during this magic stone exercise, we will encourage the students to think like of themselves being this magical stone that can transform themselves into any objects that we would want. So I will say things like magic stone, I want a tree, a house, or whatever, and then they have to form up that shape of the items that I want. Using their body. So, the first time when I tried it, I said, Magic Stone, I want a tree. So, like a typical students would usually just stand up straight, have their hands widespread to symbolize that that is a tree. And
Right.
then I just have this one particular student who happened to be just on the floor. He
Okay.
lies down on the floor, and then he puts his hands up onto his forehead, like as if like he is having like a headache,
Right.
and that is his interpretation of like what a tree is. And
Okay.
then the teachers frowned upon it, and the teacher was like, how can you do this? This is not a tree. This is like some ridiculous thing. I don't want you to like misbehave. And I was like, why are you putting like like your own definition of what is a tree and what is right, what is wrong on a student who's just trying to explore? Because like a
Right.
tree could be anything. And the student actually spoke up and said that, oh, I'm just trying to show that I am a fallen tree, which I thought was
Wow.
brilliant and creative. But the
Yeah.
teachers was not taking it, and she was like, no, I don't want that. And I was like,
Wow.
yeah. So that is some of the example that I have whereby teachers want their students to be creative, but then they
Mm-hmm.
impose their own like values of what is right and wrong onto the students, and then like in that sense kind of like cordon off the students from like exploring on their own and to find out what is on the other side, what is really creativity. Yeah.
Wow, okay, that's very interesting. So it's like almost as if, you can be creative as long as you meet these certain boundaries, or you stay within these like boundaries. For example, as a tree, you stand up
Yeah.
and you are tall, because in my mind, trees are all tall, for example.
Yeah.
Wow, okay, I hear you. I mean, I see that a lot. I mean, personally, as a student in the Singapore, syllabus, oftentimes when we studied, for example, in the O levels, that was true, right? Like there were standard answers that we were kind of aged towards. Like we were taught, these are the types of model answers that you have to more or less mirror very closely in order to hit the grounds. And if there's anyone who dared to like, I think, go the unconventional route, it's frowned upon because it's not safe, and therefore, there's no guarantee of your results and this and that.
Correct.
So yeah, that's very interesting. Maybe I'll like to, just on that idea, Jid. What are your thoughts, right? With regards to what Adi just shared, right? Like,
Yeah.
do you see this playing out, for example, in the creative field, in advertising, right? So where obviously you have two things that are influencing you. One is obviously the need to stand out with real creative ideas, but at the same time, there's that pressure of delivering on time, and perhaps there's almost like a recipe of creativity that has
Yeah.
been proven to work, and you need
Yeah.
to please clients as well. So how do you see that playing out in advertising, for instance?
Yeah. Before I get to advertising, though, it's really interesting to hear kind of Addy talking about how creativity from a kind of school context as well. Because when I first got into, well, the reason I got into advertising actually was when I went to school at first. I didn't want to do too many kind of like sort of maths and science subjects, so I actually did this like theatre studies course in A levels, and that was all about just kind of storytelling, and I thought it would just be fun. But that's kind of really sparked my kind of like creative kind of pursuit, and kind of I think ended up leading me to sort of where I am today. But it was really interesting to sort of hear the point of view of allowing sort of people to be quite free and kind of open, and I think that's what creativity for me really is all about. It's kind of like a mindset, and it's having a mindset where you're kind of very open and kind of very open to new ideas. And the opposite when I was sort of growing up in the UK actually was the teachers in our class were kind of always pushing us to actually be a lot more braver and be a lot more sort of silly and a lot more foolish. And they were actually, I realized they were kind of creating a very safe kind of environment because our class was quite small. And it actually took a lot of kind of pushing from them to actually get us to a stage where we were really sort of trying sort of silly things and comfortable to fail around each other. And that actually created a very sort of strong bond between the group. And I found myself kind of getting more and more into, just kind of being more creative and thinking things, and that generated new ideas. So it's really interesting to sort of hear Addy's point of view here in the sort of system. Maybe in Asia is a little bit different, where people are trying to impose what they think creativity is on people rather than being very open and allowing it to kind of flourish, because no one really, no one's definition of creativity is right or wrong. It's just purely kind of feelings and emotions. But the mindset of how it's created is actually very different. And I think that's kind of important for how it kind of develops further on down the line. So, yeah, I
Right.
think, yeah, and I just think maybe it's a kind of a cultural thing as well, because since kind of coming from an Asian background as well, growing up in England, I was always a little bit reserved as well, but you kind of push yourself a bit more because you're in that environment. But maybe here in Asia as well, it's a lot. People are a lot more reserved. So the opposite is you've got to really push people to get to that sort of stage before it becomes a bit more natural and stuff. Because I think culturally in Asia we're a bit too afraid to lose face and kind of do something a bit silly, um, and stuff like that as well. So
Right.
yeah, that was a interesting sort of opposite kind of point of view of what I kind of experienced, I think.
Wow. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is cool. Um, I don't know, to what extent do you guys see this, growing preference for proven ways as opposed to new, untested, novel ways of doing things, right? In your own field,
Mm.
both in advertising and for Adi in acting, and in playwriting, I mean, to what extent? Because obviously, I mean, for both these industries, there's pressures, with regards to, say, your clients, or whether it's the funding, like for example, in Singapore, I can imagine funding for theater or drama is possibly limited, and as a result, there's a lot of pressure on how to probably perform and use tried and tested ways, I suppose, of what works. So, I mean, to what extent do you see that as a growing force, and how can we how can we balance that, right? Because I mean, in an ideal world, we can say no, tried and tested ways are not important, but obviously we face that pressure. Um, how do you guys grapple with that?
Mm. Well, I think in advertising, like creativity's always got to be a little bit kind of balance between achieving the sort of client's brief, because at the end of the day, it is a business. So if it was a pure creative industry, it will be. I mean, it's not a pure creative industry because then it would be like like an Addy sort of being a playwright or being a visual artist or painter or something. But in advertising, you've got to add creativity to sort of make the work stand out, get the message across, reach the objective. But there's always a brief you have to meet. So that's always the sort of balance between how far you can sort of push it. So it's always got to have constraints. So what you try and do is you try and push it as much as you can, but make sure that the key sort of objectives always sort of being met and always being reached. And that does limit you to sort of how far you can go. So you find techniques of just tweaking little things, pushing little things further and further to try and to make it stand out. Obviously, in the
Mm-hmm.
creative process as well, you work with lots of different people, so you always want their input. You always add to something, and then together you make something that can kind of stand out, but not completely go off track. So it doesn't work at all, and then we wasted our clients' money, kind of thing. So you always
Right,
have to kind of balance that.
right, right, right. Interesting. Okay.
Uh, I like what Jit mentioned about the brief, because actually for theater in Singapore, there is a brief that we have to like also meet, similar to like the creative brief that advertising firms usually have. Like for example, like when we apply for fundings with the NAC, they will give you this like list of do's and don'ts, and the list of do's will include like, oh, your work has to kind of like provide uh, alternative perspectives and views about like say the society, but at the same time, while you provide the alternative views, you cannot promote alternative lifestyle. Then
Wow. Okay.
yeah, so then there's this like fine balance, like what do we do? So if you were to cross over and like be deemed as like those people who promote alternative lifestyle, this alternative lifestyle could be anything from like gender, or like anything that is outside of like the religion that has been accepted in Singapore.
Right.
The moment you step out of that, you are totally disqualified from like fundings.
Wow.
Yeah, so at times we as the art practitioners, part of our creativity goes into thinking of how to work around and like poke a loopholes, so that
Right.
so that we can push our agenda at the same time seem like as if we are still within the line. Yeah, so that I thought that is like something that I thought was interesting in my line of work, because it's always about like thinking of ways to maneuver around, uh,
Right.
which is then I don't know, because like a lot of times people think of creativity as uh, a mean or a way to create something.
Mm.
But to me, I think creativity could also mean that you don't create something that is tangible, but it's more of like you kind of like maneuvering around in life, for example. And like I always teach my students, I always tell them that like whatever that you learn in drama, it doesn't mean that you will become an actor or you become a performer, but it just provide you with a safe platform to just test and explore, so that when you are in your own real life situations, you can like that okay, these are the things that I've explored. So let's see what works now.
Right.
Yeah. So it
So would
doesn't
you
need to be
say, right?
tangible.
Yeah, would you
Yeah.
say because of certain barriers and boundaries that have been imposed, you are now forced to be even more creative, or would you say it's like a bane, to your practice of being an art practitioner?
I mean, it goes both ways. Some people find it as a bane because, like, with the whole censorship things, and like there are a lot of like things that you couldn't explore. But for me, it just provides you with like additional challenges to just like be more creative in thinking of ways to like maneuver around. It's just like
Right.
our like how we live our lives. I mean, like just because there's an obstacle in front of us, we don't just stop living. We just
Right.
have to figure out like ways to survive and like other ways to kind of like continue on living.
Okay.
Mm.
Nice, nice. So maybe let's jump to like something quite different on the other end, right? Let's speak to Adil, if Adil is here in the room. So as an expert in critical logistics, how what are your thoughts on creativity, and how does that play out to, in your day-to-day life, in your way that you work? We would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear
Yep.
you really well here.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Adi. Hello, Kyra,
Hello,
Hi.
hello.
Jit, Vena,
Hey.
Faisal. Kyra, thanks for the introduction, and Adi, thanks for the good sharing. Jit, your comments were very well too.
Thank
And
you.
yes, I've been hearing you guys. I'm a bit new to a house party, so don't mind me. I was like a
Clubhouse,
bit,
yeah.
yeah, clubhouse. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah, same with my first as well.
Yeah, same here. It's my first.
Yeah.
So back on to creativity with me in the critical logistics um, area.
Yep.
So what I would say is it's mainly about problem solving. Just give you something about a guy I was interviewing yesterday. It was a very different interview yesterday what I had, and this was a interview for an IT position, and my IT manager gave an algebra question to the person um, coming for the interview, and I was wondering why. And then he told me this is how he wanted to test um, how this particular candidate can problem solve. So I was thinking, hey, this is not an IT question. When I look at it, it was just a algebra question, you see. And yeah, this is one of the things that I was thinking about creativity, and what Adi says just now, and the more conventional type, what Jade was mentioning about advertising. But if you really ask me about creativity, and I think some can agree with me strongly, and I think almost everyone can agree with me that you got to be a bit naughty if you want to be creative. You need, I mean, out of the box mostly, you see, but sometimes you can be a bit naughty as well when you're
Right.
doing, when you want to be creative, because you got to get a bit um, unconventional. So yeah, like me, I deal with all different kind of levels actually. I'm a different kind of COO, but I'm on the ground, in the middle, and on top at the same time. So when, what is the most creative is if, what I see usually is in my ground staff. Sometimes we get into problems where the cargo cannot fit into the truck, and somehow or other they use some methods, you know, to make sure that it get in, because it's actually critical logistics. Of course, they put into safety and all in play and make sure that the cargo is delivered on time, on target.
Mm.
And some of the times, you really see the effort they put in. And when I take a look at it, and I was thinking, if they were conventional and if they did follow every single rules of the book, this wouldn't be possible. So that's how
Right.
I could relate to Adi and what Jade was mentioning as well. You see,
Right. You
um,
gotta be brave to break the rules sometimes, basically.
yes, maybe
Okay.
you want to swim just by the lines, you know, not
Yeah.
here, not there. You see, so this
Right.
is my concept, my idea, and the daily things, what's happening every day, and this is what I see.
Okay. That's
Yeah,
really cool. Yeah. Was
thank you,
there?
Clara.
Yeah. Was there? I mean, you were sharing about, how you need to like break the rules a little bit here and there. I was wondering if Wena had some thoughts about that, as a data scientist, Wena. Do you see yourself also, breaking rules here and there? Yeah.
Yeah, so depend on how you define rules, right? I think in science there are just like so many rules to follow that you same like art, science need, I mean, severely need creativity, because like all the breakthroughs in science need creativity, but just like it's really rare. Most of our work is like routine. You have to be trained like 10 years, then you apply your skills that trained, and you just wait for the creativity to come to your mind. But
Right.
yeah, of course, but I think similar with that, most creativities are required to solve some problem. So once
Mm-hmm.
you face something you need to solve, either it's through thinking or through create some tangible things. I mean, thinking is intangible, right? But through creating some tangible things also. I've been thinking there is some example in science that may serve as a good example for people to think about it. Uh, you you know the benzene ring is like a chemical structure,
Uh-huh.
a carbon structure in ring, right? So, but normally, so the chemical structures are in chains. Before Kakula, can like, how to say, he discovered this structure is through a dream. So when
Wow.
he's a German chemist, and he was sleeping and he dreamed this snake who bite its own tail. So that it form a ring. So he think, okay, so benzene is not a chain. The structure should be a ring. So ever since then, we can discover all the deep benzene-based molecular structures. I mean, to discover a lot of functions in our body and in materials. I mean, it's just
Wow.
quite a fundamental discovery in chemistry field. So generally in science as well. So such a discovery needs some creativity, because um, he's been thinking about this task like for his whole month or half a year. So that's why he can drink such things. And when he
Right.
drinks the snake, and he can relevant the snake to the structure of a benzene and form a ring. So it's quite a good effort to accumulate your knowledge and finally turn into creativity.
Right.
So I've been thinking it's a bit different from like Adi's example of a person, a student, trying to be a tree to perform like a tree. It's different because you really, it's not so fancy anymore. You just have to build everything on the logical things. Yeah, so you can pretend to be a tree, but you have to be functional as a tree, right? So the creativity is a bit harder. Not,
Right.
it's not like saying harder. It's just like it's a bit dull, not so not so free. You just have to
Yeah.
build all the creativity on the functionality. You have to really grow trunks and leaves to be a tree. You can't just
I
say
hear you.
yeah. So
Yeah.
let's give
Actually,
freedom.
yeah, actually, Wena, you touched upon something quite interesting, which I also want to explore further with all of you here. So one thing Wena was sharing about, I don't know who that scientist is that I mean, he's obviously someone very experienced in his field, an
Yeah,
expert who has done many years in it, such that he's even dreaming about benzene structures.
yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's something I wanted to explore. Would you guys think that it requires a certain level of proficiency in any field before you can even start thinking out of the box or even know what are the rules that are worth to be tested? Or would you say the benefit of being a newcomer is still better? So I don't know. How do you think that
That's interesting.
applies?
Yeah.
Yeah, in your field, right? So, as someone who's new to a field, someone who's very junior, who doesn't understand the rules to even know what is worth breaking or not,
Yeah.
versus someone who is clearly, day in, day out, playing by the rules and then knowing what are the boundaries that he or she can test. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is there a
Yeah.
correlation or,
I
yeah.
think that's a really interesting point actually, because especially in advertising as well, you've got to be quite disciplined with like your creative thinking as well, because you've got to use it to answer a specific problem or brief. And what I
Mm-hmm.
found is, well, actually, it's not really what I found, but creativity is actually, it's a very, very hard process because it requires a lot of like thinking and a lot of effort. And after a while, your mind naturally, when you're trying to sort of solve a problem, it reaches a point where it actually you just get very tired of it. So when we're trying to sort of like solve a brief, sometimes you'll come up with like three or four ideas, and then the first, the initial moments are very fun and you enjoy it, but then it actually becomes like really hard work, and you have to keep kind of pushing through the barrier and just keep coming up with ideas, keep coming up with ideas. And then you realize it does actually take a long time to actually develop that way of thinking, and it's your mind sort of connecting the dots. So what I sort of tell a lot of like junior teams sometime as well is that you have to absorb a lot of information when you want it to sort of solve a particular problem. So you have to put the groundwork in on learning sort of what the problem is, how it can be solved, but then you actually have to let your subconscious do its work. So not
Mm-hmm.
try and sort of push it too much, like get some initial thoughts down, but then if you sort of walk away, go for a walk or do something, your mind's actually still working. And it does take a while to actually start trusting your subconscious and letting it kind of do what it needs to do in a kind of relaxed, free environment. And then when you come back to it, some of those connections that you couldn't have thought of before are actually there. So
Right.
when Wayne was sort of saying the story of that scientist, I think it was probably just the all of the bits and the elements were there, and in his sleep he was still probably thinking about it, but his subconscious kind of maybe made the link and visualized it, and then because of the problem he was trying to solve, it kind of all connected the dots, kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure all of us, have experienced a little bit about that, right? Like there's just something that's so big and important, and you're constantly working it out in your mind, but then you just can't seem to solve it, and then you take a break, and then suddenly, aha, wow, I didn't think about that way, and then it seems clear. Yeah, that's really interesting. So you're saying, Jit, if I hear you and understand you correctly, that it actually takes time to build truly effective creative thinking, right?
Yeah,
Because it takes practice, it takes
yeah.
discipline, and structure, if I hear you correctly, right?
Yeah, structure as well, and you've got to kind of learn to sort of absorb kind of information, but also apply it to the thing you're trying to achieve or the objective you're trying to achieve. And then there's lots of kind of elements in creativity or techniques you may not realize you're using, but there are kind of, you know, techniques on ideation and thinking of different things to sort of, you know, spark your mind. But generally you've got to kind of maintain a creative mindset. So we always say, like, you know, be very hungry for new information, new knowledge. So always have that mindset. But once you want to focus in on a problem, you actually have to sort of like really get the right kind of information and solve the problem, and then apply it in a very structured way to actually work out very rationally what's going to work, what's not going to work. And then you apply creative thinking to that process to actually get to a solution, but in a slightly different way. So even though it may appear that you can just, like, very few people can just hear a problem and then, you know, within a few hours or two solve it. It really takes a lot of research, time, effort, and determination and stubbornness to actually get to a solution that is really unique and properly creative.
Right. That's really interesting. Yeah. Adi, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, do you see that as well playing out in your field? The fact that there is still a need for some kind of structure, or even, you know, the whole theory about you need to be somewhat an expert or experienced enough in your field to kind of know where and how to test boundaries. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
For me, when I first started writing and being a playwright, I actually didn't. I kind of like go the other way. So like I started off writing just for the sake of writing without have paying much attention to like structure or anything. So I didn't really go into an art school, or I didn't go into like a playwright school to be the playwright that I am today. So when I started, I just write what I feel was honest and what I feel was like makes sense to me. And then slowly from there I kind of like try to work in, okay, like what are some of the like structures that usually the playwrights here work with, and like what are some of the structures that, like, you know, say playwrights in like the UK or like US are trying out at the moment. In that way I feel like it's more freeing, because when I initially started off, because when you know a certain structure, when you try to learn like the so-called the correct ways, and then you will feel that you are being burdened by a lot of laws and rules, and like and therefore you it kind of add in the intimidation, that you feel intimidated to even try it.
Right.
Yeah, so then you wouldn't take that leap of faith.
I see.
Where else, if I feel for me, when I do it the other way, whereby I just plunge in first and then like try to figure out everything later on by taking up classes later on, I feel that it's more freeing, and it's more liberating. It's more like when I finally go for the classes to learn about structures and everything, I am more confident to actually write. Yeah.
Right.
So
Okay.
I feel like if I have started it the other way around, I feel so intimidated that I wouldn't even start writing in the first place.
I see. I see. But would you say that has to do more with, for example, the type of content you want to explore, as opposed to, for example, the skills of being a playwright? Or would you say it applies both ways?
I think it applies both way, because for me,
Okay.
I think if I feel so intimidated, I didn't even try writing, then I wouldn't even explore like the skills or the content or anything else.
Okay.
And so when I first started writing, it's more of like an expression, an outlet for me, rather than like, oh, I need to, like, you know, be in the industry, and like I need to like really get recognized or something like that. So it's more of like an outlet for me. So that's why when I first mentioned about like the tangible and intangible things, this is what I meant. Like the thing that you create based on your creativity, it does not necessarily equate to something that you can sell, that you can earn a living from. It's just like a way for you to just like figure out things on yourself, try to make sense of like things that may not even seem logical to you at that point of time, because maybe you are like so overwhelmed with certain emotions or certain thoughts, and then you just need to like kind of like figure out how to like put it in papers, and like and try to make things kind of like logical in that sense for you. So that's why I feel like the whole
Mm.
imagination, sometimes we just need to let children have their own, run with their own imagination, be crazy with their ideas, because whatever that is illogical to us might be a way for them to find that logics. Yeah, so it allows them to explore and find their own logics to kind of like explain to themselves like how things are. And then from there, of course, then we can slowly guide them to like learn about like the structures and everything. But I feel that that comes in later, because I feel if you burden the children with like the structures and the rules and the laws, it will just turn people off, and it will just like make them feel so intimidated by the whole concept of creativity and the whole concept of drama, for example.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right, right. So I see something here that I feel is worth exploring. So in some ways, right, that newcomer kind of concept, I can kind of relate to that because I mean, just sharing a little bit about me and what drives me. I've always been very big on trying new things, I realized. I started like a not for profit for single mothers. You know, it just felt like it was something that had to be done almost. And then and it was fun because I felt like I could shape anything and everything with regards to it, you know. But then as time went on, you know, and I got exposed to, for example, more established institutions and who have been dealing in that space or you know with matters regarding that space for a long time, I started realizing that they felt like oh, you know, there's this new kid on the block who thinks that they know everything and who's probably making impact, but it doesn't make sense to do it on yourself. You should actually come join a bigger organization and you know help kind of deal with the agenda at a more strategic level. You know, so I don't know. I feel like there's this dichotomy almost like on one hand those who in some ways are willing to take that risk of trying something untested and therefore you know in doing so gain some kind of recognition for daring to do so. Sometimes they get absorbed by like the mainstream or they get like pushed uh you know to the mainstream agenda, and then it becomes difficult because now there are other forces at play, right? Because now you it's no longer about just you trying to do what matters, it's also about you influencing other stakeholders so that your agenda that you thought was important remains important, and your agenda that you thought is important can be executed at a level and at the impact that you want to. So I'm just wondering, do you guys see this as well? I mean, so there's a mix. I think all of us here have had some sort of employment, you know, history where we worked for firms and who had certain rules in that sense, and also have been bosses of our own companies or our own initiatives or startups or not for profits. I was wondering, maybe Adil, do you see something like that, you know, playing out, you know, as a person who has been in an SME who needs to obviously be very agile in its thinking and its footing and very daring, but then now that I think you guys have been in the scene for about 3 decades or more, do you see this slowly changing towards becoming like you know, let's play by the rules, you know, let's go with proven and tested methods, or you know, let's not shake the boat too much, you know, there's certain things that will work, there's certain things that won't, and you trying to change things is not going to do us good because we don't know how much risk that carries. Do you see that as a concern in your field, for instance?
Yeah, thanks for the question and the opportunity, Kyra.
Sure.
So basically, there's two ways where we can look at upon it. You see, like being an SME for 30 years, right? Being very lean and agile as well. Yes, at some point during certain situations, we want to play it safe. But other times where the opportunity is there, like many other times I would say, where the opportunities are there and it's relevant, we will not play it safe. We would just go loud and big, or just go probably even in a different direction, you see.
Mm.
So
Do you intentionally encourage, for example, alternative ideas? Is that something that you push for amongst your staff, for example?
Right, right. Okay, here I would say this would be the difference between a MNC and a SME. So the
Right.
hierarchy level is very, how do I say, it's very small. The layers are just too little here, you see.
Yeah.
So the room for creativity and to hear staff's ideas and to actually take on staff ideas would be more easier, and there are less red tapes. So yes, being an SME, in my opinion, yes, there is a good room for being creative. Then again, it also depends on the situation, how creative you want to get, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you can be creative, you gotta still keep your limits to it, because there is still some kind of a reputation to uphold, so that you can't go too over the top. That brings back to what Adi says about the student and the teacher, you see, and the teacher telling the student off for doing a tree. And I was thinking about it while hearing the rest of you speak. I was also thinking about what Adi mentioned just now. Yes, for a student, yeah, you gotta leave them full creative, let them just pour everything out. But I don't think so. It's okay all the time when it comes to an organization. Sometimes we got to follow the lines, sometimes we can go above and below. It really depends on the situation.
Okay, that's really cool. Yeah, it reminds me of this story. Like in Sony, in the past when they actually had to come up with inventions, some of the greatest inventions. Like I think, if I'm not wrong, even the PlayStation was a result of a couple of engineers kind of working secretly on their projects, without their superiors knowing about it. And in my mind, I'm like thinking, wow, it obviously takes a certain kind of employees who are so driven, and who are so committed that they're willing to pay, I mean, put that time on top of their usual working hours to develop something they're passionate about. But it's not something that all employees would do, especially in this day and age. So how do, I don't know, companies actually facilitate that, right? That's kind of like the big question, I think. And
Yeah, I
yeah.
think it's important to create like a creative culture. Like Adil was saying, you can't always do whatever sort of the ideas that come up. But if you sort of foster a creative environment and creative culture where people aren't afraid to sort of say things, and they're not afraid to sort of say things even if they think they're silly, you actually start creating an environment where ideas become like more commonplace. So people start trying things, and then someone says something, and that sparks something in someone else, and then that other person adds on to it, and you basically then nurture this creative environment. And it's really important to sort of, in that environment, make sure that there's no kind of judging, and people aren't afraid to sort of say anything, and then nothing's sort of nothing sort of like sacred or whatever. Once that environment's created, you can still, as a sort of like management level or whatever, you choose what to go forward with. But the important sort of side of it is to allow that culture to sort of exist and encourage it, and facilitate it, and encourage people to sort of like get those kind of ideas out. But then you always have to, in business, kind of take a step back and say like, okay, some of these things are just aren't going to work because they're going to be either too expensive or too crazy or whatever. But there's a difference between cultivating that kind of culture and mindset within people and allowing them to sort of speak freely, then and sort of actually implementing everything as well. So, like, to your earlier point, Kyra, it is good to have some kind of fearless thinking and some kind of fearless approach, and then some people who are willing to try stuff. But then there's always got to be, because we live in the real world and the business world, you've always got to apply some kind of like thinking and logic to that. But it is important, I think, to actually make sure that this culture is nurtured and cultivated. And that, I think, comes down to sort of the management and the culture that the company want to build themselves as well.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
I
Yeah.
think I totally agree that the big companies or this entire society can provide, if they are able, right? They can provide such an environment to nurture the creativity. Like what I know, in as a data scientist, we have two types of projects. One is top down, where the managers or higher management ask us to do, or
Mm-hmm.
you can just like do another type of project, which is bottom up. Then in this case you just design something. It's like really like our startups. You have your initiative, you start to do it, then you deliver your results to your like managers, and if they see it's good, then it's finally get deployed. You get a very high KPI as well, and actually you are paid to do so. In Google and Facebook, actually, I think they have extra money, so they just pay someone like doing something random, like whatever you like to do, you just spend a day do that, and I pay you as usual. Yeah, so I think that's really nurture. I mean, as a data scientist, really give you some free time and free environment to do that thing and without feeling obligation to deliver something people ask you to do. And I
Yeah.
think our like startups as well, right? I think I think government or investors should encourage us to do some initiatives, give us fundings, and so on, support.
To think about creativity or encourage creativity, maybe.
Yeah, right. So because our initiative is like kind of like one type of creativity, right? So we create this idea and this structure of our business. I mean, this like in a general way, but I don't know the definition whether it's really suitable to call it creativity. But I think the society and the investors should support such initiatives.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for example, the World Economic Forum itself has said that creativity is so important, especially because we have technologies that are doing all the repetitive tasks that require very little value add. And then, when machines and robots essentially can replace most of the low value work streams, the emphasis on what humans, for example, can do as opposed to, say, robots, for example, is really thinking out of the box, right? Or spotting, uh, disparate dots and trying to make sense of how we can add value through those connections that people wouldn't be able to see in that sense. So it's been very interesting. I would also like to ask Faisal. Faisal, thanks so much for joining us for, like, since the beginning. Do you have any thoughts, or like, any comments or any, I mean, what do you think about creativity? How does it apply to your field? Anything at all you want to share? We love to hear from you as well. Faisal, are you there? Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I think Faisal is having some technical difficulty with
Oh,
his microphone.
oh dear. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
No worries,
but
Faisal. I mean, if you managed to fix it, that would be great
mm,
to hear from.
but I actually want to highlight how this whole talk it has boiled down then to now the whole idea of culture and nurture, right? Because those are the
Mm.
two words that I heard the other speakers are highlighting, and I like this whole idea of like creativity as being something that has to be nurtured, and it's something that we have to put in as a form of a culture, because I think this is very important, because a lot of the time most of us, because in this age and time whereby everything needs to be like an instant kind of a culture, like instant gratification, whereby you do something and therefore you have to see the results there and then.
Mm.
But I think we need to change that mindset, and we need to think creativity as a part of a culture, something that you need to nurture, and it will take a long time for
Before
you
you
to,
see its fruits,
yeah,
right?
before you see its fruits. Whoa.
Wow, Faisal.
Okay.
the higher chances of you actually reaping fruits from that, practice. And you're right, I think in this day and age where I think there's pressures from both, the top and the bottom, and in terms of like, maximizing your bottom line, making more profits, and that, especially in more established firms, has resulted in a preference for lower risk, or in a way proven ways of achieving something. And I see that especially in Singapore, I think, because like what Jit mentioned, a little bit about culture, a little bit about how we are in some ways maturing as well. We're only 50 years old, we're a very young nation, but I mean, its growth has been quite spectacular, and therefore it has kind of perhaps given rise to a certain way of living, it, and that has shown to be true in many fields, right, from education to the kind of the standard way of living, like a young adult is expected to get married by a certain age, so you sign up for a BTO flat from HDB, and then you get a house in a couple of years. I mean, I feel like there's always the mainstream way, and that becomes the preferred way because it seems to be associated with less risk, right? But on the other hand, that next big growth, that next big wave, or for example, when a huge thing like the COVID pandemic hits everybody, and everything you've known to be true has been upturned overnight, suddenly, if you haven't been able to harness creative thinking, I think the ability to bounce back in a much faster way would be a huge challenge. I think we've seen that to be true, and I think it's probably more appreciated, and that there's a need to explore and be open to alternative ways of doing things, and I hope alternative ways of thinking about things. So yeah, it's been great kind of hearing your thoughts on all that. uh we have 4 more minutes before we hit 9. I think it's a good time to kind of also wrap up. Anyone wants to just share your parting thoughts on creativity? Yeah, would love to hear your thoughts as well as we wrap up.
Yeah, I can start because I really feel inspired because when you say like in Singapore, like your life is like a sort of arranged, but not so much arranged. They have something like it's a best to get married and to go to this school and to do that. So it's kind of like actually I enjoy that. If I have nothing for it, I should enjoy that. I feel it's not bad. I like to be arranged a bit. But to be creative, you could also break the rules, right? Then you can just
Right.
try something, but then not all the creativity will lead to very good breakthrough. Maybe you end up
That's true.
not so well as arranged way. So it's just like a trial and error. So until you get a through your creativity, you try a few times, then you end up into a better way. Then we can just arrange our life in that way. That's what I think. It's quite a like a data science type of thinking. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's really cool, like I sometimes worry because I feel like more and more, because of the I see this in my own social circles, right? There's a popular way. I think every society has a popular way,
Right.
of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
And then there's the unpopular way. But then, because the popular way is so like tried and tested,
Yeah.
and it is adopted by maybe 80%, sometimes the alternative way is not given enough space to be shared as an alternative way even.
Yeah.
And yeah, and sometimes I get scared because I feel like slowly but surely, this whole concept of living in your own echo chamber is making us very, how do I say this, very close minded, if I may go, as far as that.
Yeah. It's a
And I personally get
probability.
scared, yeah, because I worry, I worry that it will pay off in other ways, right? Like, so this is quite unrelated,
Yeah.
but somewhat
Yeah.
related.
I understand. Yeah. And
Yeah,
right. So you experience different thing, even it's rare, then you still like end up earning some gaining some new experience and happiness. I think it's, yeah, it's not bad to try.
exactly. Yeah, Adu, you wanted to share something as well on
Yes,
that?
taking a little bit today from Jade, Adi. and Vena, and of course from Kyra, kind of sum it up, and also from my experience throughout the years, kind of realize the fact that, of course, discipline and experience, right? With also a little bit of a gap and room for a particular person or a project to try something different a little bit. That's where you can actually see the true colors of the creativity. I think in that way we can actually appreciate it. That's my parting. This is something I like to share before we part.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for that. Anyone else wants to share your parting thoughts
Hello, can you hear
before
me
we wrap
now?
up?
Yeah, no, it's a really good sort of session just to hear everyone's point of view. And yeah, I think overall, like the best fuel for creativity is always change. And I think we're kind of now seeing so much change with like not just technology, but new things happening. And I think it's just a perfect fertile ground for lots of people to be creative, try new things, be a bit brave, be a bit fearless, and hopefully
Mhm.
just create really cool, interesting new things. So it's exciting.
Right. Cool. And Adi, you want to say something?
Uh, I think as a parting thought, for me, creativity is really, I mean, like most of us actually practice it on a day-to-day basis. It's just a matter of whether we want to acknowledge it being a creative process or otherwise. And like I say, just now, creativity doesn't mean that you create something that is tangible. Sometimes it's really intangible. Like for
Mm-hmm.
example, like the way you maneuver your life on a day-to-day basis, like
Mm-hmm.
simple problems, like if I couldn't take the lift, then what else could I do? That kind of decision making is part
Mm-hmm.
of like creative process. So to
Right.
me, yeah, creativity, to me it applies on like your life, like whatever profession you do or whatever age you are at, that is there is a creative process in the way you lead your life at
Mm-hmm.
times. Yeah.
Right. I think that's a awesome way to wrap up actually because I think it's true, right? It really depends on how we understand creativity. It's oftentimes associated with certain fields more than others, but increasingly, I mean, COVID is a perfect example of showing how overnight everybody is forced to be creative because you need to innovate and introduce new ways of doing your business or working from home, for example. Everyone learned Zoom overnight, so it's been amazing, and I agree. The time couldn't be more ripe, I suppose, for experimenting and continuing on this journey. But yeah, once again, thank you very much, everybody. It seems I had a lot of fun and I learned a lot, and I hope you had as much fun as me. And yeah, let's continue to do whatever we can to foster creativity in both our professional and personal lives, and I hope that gives us value over the long run. All right, have a great night. Enjoy the rest of your night and weekend.
Thank
Have a
See
you.
ya.
Thank you,
yeah.
guys.
All right.
Take care,
Thank you
Thank
both.
Faisal.
you.
Speak with you again
Bye.
soon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Yeah.